This number is not the GDP of a small country. It's not the market cap of a tech giant. This is $1 trillion every single year. It's the amount of tax revenue that vanishes from the budgets of the United States and other developed nations. It's money that could rebuild crumbling infrastructure, fund revolutionary medical research, or provide free college education. But it's not collected. And here's the part that challenges everything you think you know. In most cases, this is not illegal. This isn't a story of mobsters with suitcases of cash or corrupt politicians taking bribes in dark parking garages. This is something far more systemic, far more powerful, and entirely legal. So, if it's not crime, what is it? How did we build a financial system where the people who benefit the most from its stability are legally exempt from paying for its upkeep? The answer isn't found in a single law or a shadowy conspiracy. It's a story that begins a century ago in the ashes of one world war and the dawn of American global power. It's a story with a surprising origin, a cast of unlikely revolutionaries, and a broken promise that now threatens the very fabric of our society. Stay with me, because this isn't just a lesson in economics. It's a detective story. To understand the world of the tax avoider, you first have to understand a simple concept: sovereignty. A country's borders are not just lines on a map for people and goods. They are also walls for laws. The United States can tax income earned within the United States. But what about income earned by an American? In, say, Switzerland? This was the world in the early 20th century, a world of walls. And for a long time, that was fine. The global economy was slower. If you were a wealthy industrialist, your wealth was mostly in bricks and mortar factories, land, railroads, all firmly planted inside a single country, all easily taxable. Then came the two world wars, and to pay for them, the United States introduced and radically increased income taxes, especially on the highest earners. At its peak in the 1940s, the top marginal tax rate was a staggering 94%. Now you might hear that and think, well, that's confiscatory. But here's the twist. That 94% rate was less a revenue tool and more a psychological 1A tool of wartime solidarity. It was meant to discourage massive corporate payouts and war profiteering. And for the ultra-wealthy, there was a powerful, socially accepted way to avoid it. You just didn't take a massive salary. You reinvested profits back into your company, you paid your workers well, and you built a legacy. Avoiding tax wasn't about hiding money, it was about being a corporate statesman. But this delicate equilibrium was about to be shattered, not by a politician or a protest, but by a quiet, unassuming group of men in a place no one was paying attention to. And their weapon wouldn't be a new law, but a new interpretation of an old one. Our story truly begins not on Wall Street, but in the pristine, neutral corridors of Swiss banks in the 1950s and 60s. For decades, Switzerland had offered banking secrecy. It was a powerful magnet for the wealth of European elites fleeing war and instability, but it was mostly a service for foreigners. The revolution started when a few clever Swiss bankers asked a simple question: what if we could sell this secrecy to American corporations? The problem was the walls we talked about. An American company's profits in America were subject to American tax. But what if you could move the profits themselves? This is where we meet our first key character, the transfer price. Our story truly begins not on Wall Street, but in the pristine, neutral corridors of Swiss banks in the 1950s and 60s. For decades, Switzerland had offered banking secrecy. It was a powerful magnet for the wealth of European elites fleeing war and instability, but it was mostly a service for foreigners. The revolution started when a few clever Swiss bankers asked a simple question: what if we could sell this secrecy to American corporations? The problem was the walls we talked about. An American company's profits in America were subject to American tax. But what if you could move the profits themselves? This is where we meet our first key character, the transfer price. The standardization of the shipping container in the 1960s and 70s didn't just make global trade more efficient. It made corporate structures infinitely more complex. A single product could now have its parts made in 10 different countries, assembled in an 11th and sold in a 12th. This complexity was a gift to tax planners. It created a fog of transactions so thick that no tax authority could possibly see through it. The walls of sovereignty were still there, but the wealthy and the corporations were learning to run wires through them, creating a shadow financial system operating in parallel with the legal one. And the next shock would blow the system wide open. The 1980s, Reagan, Thatcher, the rise of a powerful new ideology, neoliberalism. The core belief? That capital should be free to move across borders without any friction or regulation. This wasn't just an economic theory, it was a political project, and it had a champion. His name was Harvey S. Rosen, an economist serving in the Reagan Treasury Department. In 1985, he authored what is arguably one of the most consequential tax documents of the 20th century, the Check-the-Box Regulations. The name sounds boring. The effect was revolutionary. Before Check the Box, the IRS spent enormous effort determining whether a foreign subsidiary was a corporation or a partnership for tax purposes, a distinction with huge consequences. Rosen's idea was simple: let the companies just check a box on a form to decide for themselves. It was presented as a way to cut red tape, but its real effect was to make the transfer pricing magic trick, from earlier almost impossible for the IRS to challenge. The fog of complexity became impenetrable. The wires running between the walls of sovereignty were now officially sanctioned by the U.S. government itself. This was the big bang of modern tax avoidance, and it paved the way for the giants of the new economy. In the 1990s and 2000s, tech companies like Microsoft and Apple became the masters of this new game. They perfected structures with names straight out of a spy novel, like the Double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. This Rube Goldberg machine of corporate entities existed for one purpose: to funnel profits from sales all over Europe through a series of paper companies, ensuring they ended up in a tax-free Bermuda shell company, all perfectly legally. At one point, Apple had tens of billions of dollars sitting offshore, untaxed by any nation. The system was no longer just for a few secretive Swiss bankers. It was the standard operating procedure for corporate America. The 1% weren't just avoiding taxes, they were building a fortress. By the 2000s, the scale was astronomical, but it was all theoretical, hidden behind layers of corporate secrecy. The public knew something was wrong, but they couldn't see the monster. That changed in 2008. The global financial crisis did two things. First, it blew a hole in government budgets, forcing them to look for revenue anywhere they could. Second, it shattered public faith in the system. People were losing their homes and jobs, while the banks that caused the crisis were getting bailed out. The question on everyone's lips was, why aren't they paying their fair share? And then, the first crack, un panchak, appeared. In 2009, a whistleblower at the Swiss bank HSBC provided a massive leak of data to the French government. It was the first real look inside the fortress. Thousands of the world's wealthiest individuals, hiding billions in undisclosed accounts. This was followed by a torrent of leaks. The LuxLeaks, the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, each one revealing a more extensive, more brazen global system of tax avoidance. The public finally had its proof. The monster was real. The story was no longer a dry economic debate. It was a moral one. It was about nurses and teachers effectively paying a higher tax rate than billionaires. It was about the very definition of citizenship and civic duty. The social contract was broken. Governments, feeling the heat, promised action. We entered the era of the fix. The OECD, a club of rich nations, launched the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting BEPS project, a monumental effort to rewrite the global tax rules. But here's the tragic part of our story. It was like a game of whack-a-mole. For every loophole they closed, two more would pop up. The system had become too complex and the incentives were too powerful. The tax avoidance industry, a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem of lawyers, accountants, and bankers, was simply more agile, better funded, and more motivated than the understaffed, politically constrained tax authorities. The fixes were often written with significant input from the very corporations they were meant to regulate. The result was a new layer of bureaucratic complexity that large corporations could navigate, but that crushed small businesses who couldn't afford the legal firepower. The promised trillions in recovered revenue never really materialized. The system had been diagnosed, but the cure was elusive. So where does that leave us today? Right back at that shocking number, $1 trillion a year in the US alone. The game hasn't stopped, it's just evolved. Let's make this personal. When you get your paycheck, your taxes are withheld before the money even hits your bank account. It's efficient, it's automatic, and for you, it's inescapable. Your wealth is also in your house, and your 401k, der Speer Tachos. Assets firmly within the grasp of the taxman. Now consider the modern billionaire. They don't pay themselves a massive salary. Their wealth is in assets, primarily shares in their companies. And here's the legal masterstroke. Unrealized capital gains are not taxed. So how do they live? They don't sell their shares. They borrow against them. A bank is happy to lend you $100 million at a 1% interest rate when you have $5 billion in stock as collateral. That loan is not income. It's debt. It's tax-free. You use that to buy your yachts, your islands, your political influence. When the loan comes due, you borrow more, or you sell a tiny fraction of your assets. Your stock continues to appreciate untaxed, often for your entire life. When you die, your heirs get the assets with a stepped-up basis, meaning the capital gains tax on decades of growth is simply wiped away forever. You are playing a game of checkers where every move is taxed. They are playing 4D chess on a board they helped design, where the primary way to win is to never trigger a taxable event. So, after this long and winding story, what are we left with? 3 clear takeaways. Takeaway 1. This is not an accounting problem, it's a power problem. The tools of avoidance, the transfer pricing, the shell companies, the buy, borrow, die strategy are all symptoms. The disease is a profound imbalance of power and influence. The financial elite have the resources to shape the tax code, and the political system is responsive to those resources. The endless, complex loopholes are not accidental. They are the features of a system designed to look rigorous on the surface while being porous underneath. Takeaway 2. The legal distinction is a red herring. We began by saying this is legal, but legal simply means the rules, as written, allow it. And the rules were written by people under intense lobbying from those who benefit from these loopholes. Calling it legal doesn't make it morally neutral or economically efficient. It just means the system is working exactly as designed for a specific group of people. Takeaway 3. This isn't just about fairness, it's about function. We often frame this as a debate about envy or soaking the rich. But that misses the point. A society is a collective project. It needs roads, schools, courts, a military, a safety net, and basic research. All things that taxes pay for. When the primary beneficiaries of that stable society systematically opt out of paying for it, the project begins to decay. The crumbling bridges, the student debt crisis, the shrinking middle class. These are not separate issues. They are the direct consequences of a starved public treasury. We are left with an open-ended thought, a warning. The story of the 1 trillion is not over. We are still writing it. The current system creates a vicious cycle. Wealth buys political influence, which creates more favorable tax laws, which generates more wealth and more influence. It is a feedback loop of inequality that, if left unchecked, threatens the foundational promise of a merit-based democracy. This isn't a call for a simple he or she one-time wealth tax or a punitive measure. It's a call to recognize that the invisible architecture of our global financial system is the most powerful force shaping our collective future. The question is, who is that architecture built to serve? The mystery we started with is solved. We know how they do it. The question that remains is, what are we as a society going to do about it? Your call to action is not to rage, but to learn. The most powerful antidote to a complex, hidden system is sunlight and understanding. Share this video with one person who needs to see it. Read the investigations from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Ask your political representatives not for simplistic soundbites, but for their detailed plan to simplify the tax code and close the gap between what is owed and what is paid. The story of the next $1 trillion is being written right now, and for the first time, you are no longer in the dark.